This is SW321, SW421 Software Project Management, and I'm talking about Wysocki Chapter 9, how to execute a TPM project, a traditional project management project. So let's have a look. As usual, there are tools, templates and processes to consider. When you're executing, the main thing you need to do is communicate. So you need your reporting. You need to be able to have graphical reporting tools. You need to manage the scope bank. So this is the idea that things change, requirements change, and you need to be able to cope with completely new and additional requirements or requirements that you decide to drop. There are going to be issues coming along, so you need to have some sort of a way of tabulating them. You need to talk about status. You need to have a problem escalation strategy, and then right at the end you need to have approval to close the project. So lots of mostly reporting things. Current period reports, cumulative reports, exceptions, stoplight reports, variance reports, Gantt charts, burn charts if you're in Agile, milestone trend charts, earned value analysis, or I called it EVMS, earned value management system, integrated milestone trend charts and EVA, and status meetings and escalation strategies. So the thing that characterizes effective reporting is it's timely, complete, accurate and intuitive. It's not burdensome. You don't have to spend hours putting the report together. It's not counterproductive. It doesn't stop you getting stuff done. It's acceptable to senior management. It is an effective early warning system when things go wrong or when things may go wrong. And it's the intuitive bit is it's understood by those who need to know. And there's 5 types of project status reports: current period, cumulative, exception, stoplight and variance. So one way to report is to generate information out of your Gantt chart, out of your project plan. So you've got, this is just plotting. On the x-axis is time, and on the y-axis is the number of tasks in the plan completed. And the black line is the planned completion sum, or cumulative number of tasks completed, and the dashed line is the number of tasks actually completed. And as you can see, we're way behind in terms of the number of tasks we wanted to finish. So why do we measure duration and cost variances? We do it because we can catch deviations early, and the earlier you can catch changes or problems, the easier it is to fix them. You can dampen down oscillations. Sometimes things get out of control and they oscillate, so that's another reason to do it. As I said, it's similar to the first line. You can knowing there's a problem means you can take corrective action early, and you can determine weekly schedule variance and weekly effort variances. So there's lots of information about a project, and how do you update it, and what do you update? Usually you set a particular period of time and day of the week, and you issue the report on the same day of every week. So report the actual work accomplished, record what's done and re-estimate what's left. Make sure you report start and finish dates, record days of duration, and the accomplished and remaining days. You report the resource effort spent and anything remaining, and you report the % complete. How to keep a project on schedule. Hold daily team meetings. Complete tasks as soon as possible. Report problems as soon as possible. Don't let anybody add more work to the project without lots of thought about it. Don't guess. Ask questions before so you have the information. Good enough is good enough, right? You don't want to gold plate it. You don't want it to be perfect. It just has to meet the requirements. So that's what the next line is. And be open and honest with your teammates. If you don't know how to do something, tell them. Ask for help. Don't think you can cover it up, because you probably can't, and maybe by the time your teammates find out, it's too late and you've blown your schedule. So positive variances are good, mostly. That means you're ahead of schedule or you're costing less than budget. Negative variances means that you're behind schedule or you're spending too much money. And this is an example Gantt chart which we've seen before, and you can see various parts of that. Okay, you can see the baseline, and you can see the planned, or the actuals. And it looks like we've skipped out by about nearly 3 weeks, from February 11th until March 3rd. One of the simplest reporting mechanisms is a traffic light system. Red, green, yellow, or green, yellow, red. Right? Green, everything's okay. Yellow, there's a problem, but we think we're turning it around. And red is we've got a problem and we don't know what to do about it. We haven't figured out what to do about it yet. When we're looking at Agile, but you can do it in traditional project management as well, you can, instead of doing a burn up chart, which is the cumulative completed tasks chart, you can do a burn down chart, which is this one where we say, okay, we've got 10,000 hours of project labour at the start, and we're going to plan, the black line is the planned expenditure of those 10,000 hours, and the dashed line is how we actually spent it. And here's some plots where we've got time along the x-axis and whether we're on schedule or early or late along the x-axis, on the y-axis. Right, so here we've gone from being late and trending late to trending late, and then all of a sudden jumping up and we're early. So something fantastic happened then. Here we started off right on schedule, and then we actually got a little bit ahead, and we kept that same amount ahead, which is pretty good. Here's another. We've got a big jump from going slightly behind to well ahead, which is nice. And here's a plot of the continuous earned value as you progress through time. Right, and it's called the S-curve, and this is usually the sort of plot you get when you plot out the project progress. 1/3 of the time is going to only give you a quarter progress. 2/3 of the time gives you about 3/4 of the progress, and the last 1/3 gives you that extra 1/4 to take you to completion. Sometimes you can be lucky and there's no ramp up or learning time, so you can make nice good progress immediately. That's the red curve. But more generally, you've got the S curve, where it takes a while to get moving, and you don't make as much progress early on in the project. Even worse, if you are doing this red curve, you're going to be way behind, and you should have been able to pick that about halfway through. But the circle with the black circle here is you've lost 75% of the time, and you've only got 30% of it done. I talked about earned value during last week's lecture, and the key piece is there's really a few ways to capture earned value. My recommendation to you is that you are not allowed to capture earned value from a task until the task is complete. Right? There's other ways to do it. You can say, okay, the task is X% done, and that means you're allowed to capture X% of the earned value. That's another way of doing it. Or you can quantize the task. So you're not allowed to capture any value until the task is 50% done, say, or 25, 50, and 75% done. Depends. Any measurement system can be gamed. The one I suggest, where you're not allowed to capture earned value until you're done, is the one that's least likely to be gamed. It is very conservative. It can mean that you look like you're behind when you're not, but it's better than being able to show that you're ahead when you're not, which is what is possible with if you're allowed to capture earned value as a percentage of the task done. Okay, so this is again a plot of the actual versus the baseline, and the difference in the vertical difference between the two curves is the cost variance, and then the horizontal difference between the two curves is the schedule variance. Right? So this one we're doing pretty well, I think. We're not spending as much, but we're pretty far ahead, I think. I don't know. So here's I went through this in last week's lecture. I'm not going to speak to it here, but the idea is that there's planned value. How much did you plan to spend when it was to be done? There's earned value. How much of it have you done at this particular point in time? And then there's the actual cost, which could be the same as the earned value, but maybe not. Maybe the task takes longer than you planned, or maybe there are additional expenditures like we had in the game. So that's the actual cost. So those three numbers are generally different unless everything's precisely on track. Right, so here we've got the planned value in green, the actual cost in red, and the earned value in blue. And the cost variance is the difference between the actuals and the earned, and the schedule variance is the difference between the earned and the planned. And then we can forecast a little bit what's likely to happen and perhaps when we're likely to finish. And the two numbers that I suggested you use are the SPI and CPI, the Schedule Performance Index and the Cost Performance Index. And the SPI is the earned value and the planned value, and the Cost Performance Index is the earned value of the actuals. So here's just some examples. We've got one is exactly on schedule and on budget, and here we've got C is under budget and ahead of schedule, and the S is over budget, or actually I suppose C is the CPI and S is the SPI. So C means we're under budget and S means we're behind schedule. And here we're both under budget and ahead of schedule at the end there. and here we're both over budget and behind schedule. And you can actually, one thing you can do is, if you've got a lot of projects happening in your portfolio or in your company, you can plot all of their earned value SPIs and CPIs and track the average of all of them, and see what that tells you. It'll tell you that might tell you something about the projects that you need to think about if they're always behind schedule and over budget. So we talked briefly in the previous lecture about the scope bank. You have an initial deposit of, say, 10% of total labour, so that you can process scope change requests and draw down time from the scope bank to actually do them without having to impact the schedule. If there is a list of stuff in the scope bank, then the client should regularly reprioritize everything. You know? And you should add time to the scope bank if you decide that there's stuff that we're not going to do, and you should remove time from the scope bank once you decide to do new stuff. So if you've got a bug list or an issue list or whatever it is, it should have an ID, a date logged, a description, an impact on the project, somebody to own it to make sure it gets fixed, any actions to be taken, the current status, and once it's done, what the outcome is. You really need to think very carefully about meetings and whether to have them. Have a look at the listen to the podcast I recommended for SW321 students. It's an optional project to have a look at to generate some process around holding meetings. But the key things are: who should attend, when are they happening, why are they happening, and what format do they have. I've often used a 15-minute daily status meeting where the entire team, or at least the development team, talks and says three things. What have you done since the last meeting? What are you going to do before the next meeting? And what's stopping you getting things done? And this is a bit more formal, where you've got an actual plan and a complete task list. So you've got to say whether you're on schedule or ahead of schedule or behind schedule. And during the meeting, you can update the scope bank and update the issues log if somebody says they've fixed an issue. When you've got a very specific problem and you're holding a meeting about that problem, you should only really pull in the people who are affected. You need to agree on what the problem is. You need to agree on who owns it. You brainstorm solutions. You prioritize the best of those solutions. You update the issues log, and then you schedule the next meeting. And whoever owns the problem should then fix it and report back at the next problem management meeting. Right, we've got this diagram again. We've got time, cost, and resource availability along the axes, and then inside the triangle we've got scope and quality. So how do you escalate problems? If it's a project manager based strategy, then one thing you could do is don't do anything. The problem will fix itself. Maybe you can examine dependency relationships and move tasks around, or maybe you can assign resources better, move people around. If you're able to negotiate with the resource manager, maybe you can get more resources, more people. Or if you're talking to a client, maybe they'll accept a early release that is not fully featured, with a view to getting a later release that is more featured, but maybe it's later than they expect, or maybe you just request a schedule extension. And there's a continuum of escalation strategies, right? No action required all the way up to request a schedule extension. And the main thing that you want to get to at the end of execution or monitoring and controlling is getting approval to close the project. So somewhere along the line you have to have acceptance criteria, and you have to be able to prove to the client that the project has met those acceptance criteria. And then we can close out the project, which will be the subject of the next video.